All right, hello, and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale the Real Seeker, and this is going to be the final part two of the S&S or Skeptics and Seekers episode on our Morality Round Table that we did a couple years back in 2019 or something like that. This will be the official last time, to the best of my knowledge. This is the last show that I was involved in terms of Skeptics and Seekers that I haven't posted up already. This was me as a guest, appearing with also Randall Rouser and Marvin Wallace representing the Christian side, against the atheist Brian with a Y, Vol the atheist, or Val as we like to call him, David Johnson, and Andrew Knight. So this is the final thing, part two. This will be the last thing. I'm pretty sure, 99.99% sure, the last Skeptics and Seekers show I'll ever post that I was involved in. So it'll be totally brand new content after this, RSM content all the way going forward. So enjoy this show on morality here.
All right, Dale. If you're still there, why don't you go ahead and punch in and just take Marvin's chair. I hate empty chairs in the studio. I wanted
so I
to
can go back on mute, right? And you'll just call me.
yeah, you can come in as you need to. But there are a few points from some of Marvin's speech that I wanted to talk to Brian about, and maybe have him and Dale have some conversation about that. So
don't forget to ask me the.
I haven't.
Question.
I have not. I have not forgotten.
Andrew, you were just dying to give away your money, Andrew. You better skulk away real fast.
I'm half afraid to ask Andrew this question, but I know I have definitely not forgotten to ask. So the thing I wanted to go back on that there just wasn't enough time for there is the exemplar notion, and so I'm sure Marvin and I will have a chance to discuss this on the board, but I wanted to bring that out a little bit more, because there's a kind of an assumption among the Christians who talk about exemplars. Dale, you were actually the first one to bring up exemplars. I think you were. Marvin may have in the first show, but I know that you talked about it a bit, Dale. Can an exemplar be a fictional character? So that's my first question. Does the exemplar have to be a real character? Can it be a character in a parable type situation? Can that be an exemplar?
I don't see why not.
Okay. So being not real is not a barrier to being an exemplar. You just have to be an example of the type of morality that you're talking about. Very good. So that said, I don't believe the Jesus of the Gospels is a real person. Now that wouldn't be a barrier based on your definition of him being an exemplar. So I will accept that at face value. But the other problem that I have is that I don't think the Jesus of the Gospels is a particularly good person. So I started this series in the first season, and I meant to talk about it much of the second season. That didn't happen, so I will get to it in the third season, I promise. But yeah, I am one of those very few rare people who has studied Jesus as extensively as I can with the full extent of my ability to research and study the Gospels and learn as much as I can there. I don't find Jesus to be an exemplar of anything for me. And so the question, what would Jesus do, is just an exemplar of what I wouldn't do in most given situations. And so I think that it is a bit of an assumption that Jesus is an exemplar. So what besides the fact that, he's a story in a book, said to have said some things and did some things, what makes him an exemplar of morality?
Well, I mean, it's obvious. Are you asking me as a Christian, or are you saying?
Yeah, I'm asking you as a moral philosopher who thinks that Jesus is an exemplar. I don't. How did he become the example of what you think morality is?
Yeah, so speaking, so obviously as a Christian, he's God in the flesh, he was sinless, so he lived a morally perfect life. So that means that his example of life is instructive.
Okay, him being God in the flesh holds no weight for me. Even atheists who believe stories about Jesus can say he's an exemplar. But when you say he's God in the flesh, that doesn't actually cut it. So beyond that, you say he's sinless. He lived a sinless life. Well, again, I'm not sure that means anything to an atheist either. Because what you consider sin is just whatever Jesus did is not sin. And so I'm not sure that that's particularly well defined either. And so you say he's perfect. Okay. But there's so much life and experience that he did not live. He did not live a family life, for instance. He has no idea what a man and a woman go through, or a man and a man go through, trying to build a life together and raising kids and paying property tax and college educations and things like that. He's missing so much life. To call him, the moral exemplar because he lived the perfect life. I don't know anyone who wants to live the life that Jesus lived. That nothing about that life is perfect.
Well, so in the first place, I never brought this up about Jesus being the exemplar. I don't even know what you guys are talking about. But terms of
in your first conversation with Dale, I thought that you had briefly mentioned exemplars, but I may be getting you confused with Marvin because.
Yeah, I'll confess. I was doing other work, and I also fell asleep for part of it. So I don't know, but I will answer your question. Sorry,
you're not supposed to say this on air, Dale.
I'm going back on mute. I'm going.
We all know it happens, Dale. We just we don't. Never mind.
But
I will answer
which part you fell asleep to. I think that's
the last thing I remember was Brian yelling like, "I will not." Like I kind of woke up when he's like, "I will not throw a rock" or something. But someone's face. But
you've been out for a while, man.
Okay. So,
there have been two world wars since
for the
then.
exemplar. Did I get the job?
Yeah, but. Someone can be an exemplar without being an exemplar on everything, right? I mean, Jesus doesn't have to be married to be an exemplar. We can take exemplars from the principles that we get from him. Love everyone, love your neighbor as yourself, or something. And he gives us teachings about.
So, like
marriage.
love your enemy. We can use him as an example of how he loved his enemies. The Jews, the Jewish leaders. He called them snakes. He called them the equivalent of asses. He called them. He was very rude, very harsh to them.
I've done the same times, right? So it's
yes, you've been a fine example of that, but it's an example that I don't want to follow.
It's something I think you're wrong. Here's why you should follow that exemplar, right?
Okay, but what I'm trying to do is get you to justify exactly why you think every behavior that Jesus had is some kind of perfect example. You see, I don't believe in exemplars in the way that I think you and Marvin are talking about exemplars. I think that there are people who have set good examples for many things. I think that Martin Luther King was a good example for some things, but he was a very flawed man, and I wouldn't set him up as some kind of hero. Gandhi was a good example for some things, but I don't want to be a Gandhi. Hell, Mike Tyson is a good example for some things, but he's not someone that you would necessarily say, okay, kids, be like this guy. So I think that humans are humans, and some of them live their lives, doing pretty decent things. I think the average Joe six-pack is probably a good exemplar, and you can pick him randomly. But I think that's fine. I don't see perfection as a kind of a goal for humans anyway. So I don't worship at the altar of never doing anything that you would consider wrong. I mean, we're humans. We're going to do some stuff, and that's cool with me. So I don't see how you get to Jesus being this kind of. I don't see how you can get any human being and say, well, this is the example that everyone ought to be like.
Because we would want to live a sinless life in whatever context we are. I mean, that is the ideal. We should, just because we do fall doesn't mean that we should.
I don't want to live a sinless life.
Yeah, well, you're just wrong.
Well, sure, but I don't believe in sin. But to the extent that you believe in sin, I don't want to live a sinless life. I don't want to live a life without the thing that you think of as sin. It would be a sin for me to say, screw your God, he's a monster. I like that sin. I'm going to commit it again before the show's over. So I don't want to, that just doesn't cut it for me as any kind of example. But I'm going to throw Brian back in here. Maybe you guys can talk about exemplars. We've talked a lot about the first show. There's more to go there. A little bit about homosexuality has jumped into the picture, so I don't want to necessarily go there. Dave and Russell and I talked a little bit about epistemology, and we've done a little bit of that. The conversation, though, about moral naturalism versus there needing to be a God to ground morality or something supernatural. I'd like to hear a little bit more reflection on that from the people who remain here. And so, Brian, if you and Dale would like to talk about that a little bit. And also, Dale, if you want to go back on some of the stuff I was talking about earlier with the definitional thing, why is it okay to say God's nature is numerically equal to good? So I'm gonna turn it back over to Brian and have you guys do a little bit of back and forth there, if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. So yeah, I mean, again, this is gonna dovetail with our approaches, right? It sounds like Dale is starting from the top down, saying there needs to be this perfect source of morality, and then therefore it must exist, and then pointing to a very specific deity as said source. I'm going from the ground up, and I'm starting with what we both agree is real, which is nature. I would not call myself a naturalist in the stance that I think the supernatural is definitely not real, but I'm certainly not including it in my moral analyses because it has yet to be demonstrated as real for me. It would need to be demonstrated first before I started pulling it in to my moral analyses. So that would be how I approach going through moral decisions, in the same way that when I'm leaving my house, I'm not factoring in 9 mobsters at the end of my driveway trying to stop me from going to work, because there are no mobsters at the end of my driveway trying to stop me from going to work. Once they show up, they start factoring into my decision making about what I'm doing when I leave my house. So to you, Dale, I would say you need to come with the demonstration that the deity is actually real before I start bringing it into morality, rather than trying to define him into existence because he needs to be the perfect source of morality.
Yeah, so we would present arguments. So in the first place, I don't know if you're talking about morality, we're not really starting from the ground up. We're starting with naturalism. We don't agree at all that naturalism provides a foundation, that morals are grounded in a natural property. So that isn't a common ground for most people.
But I didn't say that, Dale. I said, you agree that nature exists, right? I'm in nature. The tree outside your window is in nature. The fact that when I touch a stove and it's hot, that's nature. You agree with me that those things are real, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the things we can confirm are real. We may disagree on what is real, and again, we could flesh that out. And I would then say the same thing for the God. We have to agree that the God is real before we could go together in bringing him into moral analyses, and we can't do that either. So How do we go from there?
Well, I would say in the same way, we should agree that there are non-physical morals, moral truths, and that there are these moral truths. And from that, we give a moral argument for God's existence. And that's where, I wasn't prepared to argue for God's existence and stuff. I thought I was just going to be probing Bell's views, but,
right. But again, so I don't think there's a moral truth out there in the same way that there's a taxi cab that's out there, right? Think about sports, the sport of baseball, right? Baseball exists, but baseball is a concept. Baseball doesn't exist as a thing in the world. It is a concept that we know exists when it is instantiated by people playing baseball. And it can take many different forms in many different places with many different equipment and people. So I think morality is similar to baseball in that way. It's a concept. It's not something that's out there. And when you start saying it's a moral truth out there to be found, I'm not tracking with that.
And let me just jump in. Dale, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. We lost our Christian interlocutor early, and I just thought that you might want to take the opportunity to sit in for him. But you do not have to if you do not want to.
Totally, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. I'll just say, I get what you're saying, that we need to argue that God exists. I don't think that we have to argue that God exists to say that there are moral truths that exist that are not based in natural properties, that can be argued through different ways, right? Like the attempt that I tried to do with David, for example, that on slavery is wrong, is a logically necessary thing. I didn't talk about God at all there. I was just trying to
and I wouldn't agree that slavery is it's got nothing to do with logic as far as I'm concerned, right? I evaluate slavery, and slavery is a means to an end. It's one that's not necessary. It causes more harm than it causes good. There are better ways to organize commerce. There's better ways to organize employer-employee relationships. So those are the reasons why I think slavery is bad. If we lived in an alternate universe where slaves were treated like princes, then this conversation would go differently. But we live in this world where slavery means one guy gets to have the whip and the other guy gets to move the rocks, or else he gets the whip. That's why slavery is bad.
Yeah, so you're still affirming a proposition that it's bad so long as slavery is defined as slavery, right? In terms of what it entails.
Right. But there's nothing logically necessary about that. There's not some every world slavery is bad, because there could be other worlds where, again, the slaves are the guys on the couch getting fanned by grape leaves and, concubines and what have you, right? So,
that's not slavery.
I think kicking this up to this logically necessary is just an unnecessary move that just obfuscates.
Yeah, but that's not slavery. You're just slapping the word slavery on something that's not. Obviously, slavery has a meaning, right? Where I said all the morally relevant circumstances are the same. So you can't take away the whip. It's always a guy being whipped by an oppressor to do work for them or something like that. That's what slavery is. So if
right. And what I'm saying is I don't have access to all of these logically possible worlds to evaluate all of the variables existing in those worlds to tell you whether slavery is bad in every world. All I can speak coherently about is what's going on in this world with slavery.
So Brian, no, that's not true. You have modal evaluating faculties. Can you not conceive of a possible world where pretend everything's the same? You're whipping the African, a white guy is whipping a British white guy is whipping an African American in the actual world. This occurred in 1750 or whenever it is. You can't conceive of a world where that took place in 1350 instead. That's a different possible world where it's the same fact, and the date, the change in circumstance of the date.
Right, but I didn't say I couldn't conceive of any other options. I said I don't have access to all of the other options. I can conceive of a world where slaves are considered so valuable because you can't have the pyramids without them. You can't have all the cotton picked. You can't have fields plowed. And so as such, the slaves are treated like gold. They're fawned over. Their children are educated. They're treated amazingly. I can conceive of a world where slaves are treated better than they are in the ways that we've known it that we are. So that's what I'm trying to say is you've got to give me the actual other variables on the ground before I could tell you that there's no other world where slavery isn't a good thing. From where I sit, if you put a gun to my head, of course I think slavery is wrong in every conceivable world. But I admit that I don't have access to many, many conceivable worlds where maybe that would be disproven.
So it sounds to me like you're changing the morally relevant circumstances, right? So this is what Christians do. Forget about possible worlds. This is what we do with the actual world. When Christians make the argument, which is an incomplete defense, when they talk about in Israel in the Old Testament, it wasn't slavery, it was indentured servitude, and that was good. It's like having a job. It helped the poor and stuff like that. This solves the thing because you're changing the morally relevant circumstances or something, and that's why people can say, well, that's no problem. And this is why someone like David J. will go, yeah, but don't forget about those foreign slaves. They didn't have the same rights that Israelite slaves had. They were treated in the same way, according to him, in the same way that the black slaves were treated in the 19th century. So what you're doing is you're changing up the morally relevant facts of the matter, and then you're just slapping the word slavery on it to say, well, here's an exception or something like that, right? But
so it sounds like you're making it a tautology then. Slavery is bad because it's defined as bad. If you start changing what falls under the umbrella of slavery, then you've just denuded the word and it's not slavery anymore. So if that's what you're doing, then sure, I'll agree. Slavery is bad all the time in all purposes because it's defined that way.
Well, it's not that it's defined that way. I'm just saying, like, if there's the morally relevant facts, we would need to discuss what that is. You know, oppressing someone or something. Put it this way: treating a human being as property, saying that they are ontological property or something. They're not. We degrade them. Let's just look at that. That's necessarily wrong. When you say that a person is property, there are no exceptions to that. There are no circumstances or exceptions to that moral truth.
Right, and what I would say is I can agree with that, but I'm open to someone presenting morally relevant facts or whatever other variables to change my mind. I'm not willing to say that I can sit here and tell you in all possible universes this is the way it is. I have epistemic humility in that way. So it depends what level we're talking about. I don't want to kick it up to this logic level because I think that's obfuscating the facts on the ground.
Okay, well, there's nothing I can do about that, but I'm not lacking epistemic humility any more than I'm lacking epistemic humility in saying I know it's true 1 + 1 = 2 in all possible worlds. I'm not going to just say, well, maybe there's one world where it can. No, I know in all possible worlds it's that, and I would say it's the same with this fact. If you don't have access to that, there's nothing I can really do. If you don't have the knowledge that, if you think that there is somehow a possible world where it's, I mean, what example, what circumstance would be different? What fact would be different in that possible world?
Let me see if I can help you a little bit, Dale. Because I want to move on from this point, but I feel like you are frustrated because you're not able to make the next point in the line that you want to make, and I haven't cooperated because I didn't answer it right apparently, and Brian's not answering it right. But let's go with, say, the 1 and 1 is 2 thing, because I think most of us would agree that 1 and 1 being 2 is a logically necessary fact, as you're describing it, that in all possible worlds that we can think of, 1 and 1 is 2. What's the next step in your logic chain from there if you get something that's logically necessary?
So yeah, from there it would be trying to argue that there would be a god or godlike being that would ground that necessary truth.
Okay, so something that's logically necessary requires a god for it to be logically necessary?
Let's start here. It requires a necessary grounding. The grounding itself that explains that
Tell me
fact.
what you mean by grounding, because this is not language that I use in my everyday life. This is only language I hear when Christians talk about morality. And so what do you mean that 1 and 1 equals 2 is a logically necessary fact, and that has to be grounded in something? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it needs an ultimate. It needs a sufficient explanation for its existence.
Isn't the sufficient explanation that 1 and 1 is 2?
No,
That's not a sufficient explanation.
no. So
Okay.
here's one. So saying that 1 + 1 = 2 exists out of logical necessity is a sufficient explanation. But here's why I would say that's inadequate, because it doesn't make sense for for abstract propositions like numbers to just exist, in the same way it doesn't make sense for moral principles like justice to just exist. They have to be grounded in something, and unlike the morals,
everything that exists that is true in every possible world, it's not enough for that just to be true. Like, for instance, I am alive. Now, there may not be a version of me in every possible world, but every possible world would agree that in this world I am alive. So the fact that I am alive, you're saying that that's not sufficient, that that has to be grounded in something else.
Well, sure, because you're a contingent being, right? But I'm talking about things like mathematical propositions are necessary, but they're necessary dependent entities, right? If we're taking abstract entities inherently don't make sense to exist on their own. So number 1 in our reality, have you ever met the number 1? Have you shook hands with the number 2? No, these are objects that exist in minds. They're inherent.
I don't see them as objects. I see them as simple descriptions of relationships between things. So numbers are descriptions of relationships. So I think that you're making a category. I think Christians and philosophers too are making a category error by suggesting that they are things that need to be grounded in anything. Morality is a description of how social beings relate to one another. Again, this is a description of relationship. It is not a thing that has to be grounded in anything other than the fact that you and I have a relationship, and I am responsible for how I treat you, and I can treat you in a moral or immoral or an ethical or unethical way, but that is not a thing that has to be grounded in something else. It's grounded in our relationship.
Okay, so that's just a cute claim. And when it comes to mathematical objects, there are a lot of people that I respect. Dr. William Lane Craig, to name one, who's an anti-realist like you. There are various positions on mathematical propositions. I'm a realist. Most mathematicians on the planet are realists. Most scientists are realists when it comes to numbers and that sort of thing as well. So I take the view of divine conceptualism, right? That since we know that numbers exist in minds, if they are things, then they are thoughts in God's mind. They are mental objects, not abstract objects. So that would be what I would be grounding it in. I would be arguing for the personhood or a mind for these objects to exist. Now, there are various ways people, again, there are various arguments to try and argue that numbers are things, or a realist perspective on numbers. Obviously there multiple realization argument or something like that. Again, I'm not prepared for this
No, I
argument.
understand. You and I were supposed to have a show on this once upon a time, but it never materialized. Let me just ask you one more question. I want to see if I can bring Val in on some of this. So the one more question I have regarding this type of realist versus non-realist view. So you believe that moral truths are real objects of some sort that have to be grounded in something. I say that they are merely relationships between people in ways to describe relationships. I would also put as an example of relationships, say, emotions. That's more of a description of how we feel about things. Are emotions also necessary, true things that have to be grounded in something? And if not, what's the difference between an emotion and, say, a moral good?
Well, it's just based on inherently what they are. An emotion is a sensation, right? But there can be a proposition about about an emotion or something, and that would be logically necessary in the same way.
So I feel happy. Let's say a statement about that emotion. Does that need some kind of God to ground that fact in?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at least that's consistent, but I don't see it. Can we bring Dale back for a moment? And I know that we wanted to advance that conversation that you were having earlier. I'm sorry, Dale. Can we bring Val in for a moment? Val, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So Val, before. I don't know whether I'm sicking you on Dale or sicking Dale on you. Before this dogfight continues,
I did have some things to say about Marvin's stuff.
I did. I wanted to ask you about some of that, but I also wanted to, because you and I have a disagreement, and so I just want to go round robin with everybody I disagree with, which is almost everybody. But we had a little bit of clash the other day, and I wanted to know if you had a chance to rethink that, or if you've heard anything that makes you think differently. I was saying that the Christian and the non-Christian does not mean the same thing when they talk about good, and I continue to think that you are wrong about that. I do understand where you were coming from, I think, but whenever I talk to a Christian on the board, and I had a little bit of this conversation with Marvin, it becomes very clear that at least some Christians are not talking about the same thing that at least I am talking about when I talk about the good. And I don't think they're talking about the same thing that you're talking about when they talk about a good. And the fact that their definition of good has something to do with a God. It can't be, it's inextricably linked from their ideas about God, means that there has to be something fundamentally different. Do you want to readdress that in light of the conversation that you've heard so far?
Well, I would still say that it boils down to what we're asking. So there's a sense in which, as I said before, I think you're both involved in the same project, and therefore you're asking what are the reasons why I ought to do this versus ought to not do that, and the answer to that is going to be what is good and what is moral. So you do have a general ground level agreement as to what you are seeking. The Christian comes up with a different answer to it, and insofar as he has a different answer that depends on a God, and he says morality, this is the answer for why you ought to do this over that, and it's the ontological ground, then in that sense, yes, he's talking about a different good than you're talking about. But I still think it's there's a division between the project that you share and the answers that you will disagree on.
Yeah, I don't think.
So I still think there's an agreement.
I don't think the project is the same, and I hope that you don't take too much offense for this, but I think that you have been duped. I think you have been duped by Christian propaganda, and some of the philosophical maneuvering that they do to hide the good that they're talking about. And so, the project of the Christian is not the same project that you're engaged with. The project of the Christian is to fulfill to their best ability to be a mirror of the nature of God. And this is why they consistently come up with different answers to questions about what the good is. I will talk about this a little bit in my closing, but there is a very different mindset of, say, the person who looks at the stoning of the homosexual law, since we've already talked about that, those laws, and says, well, that was good for their time because that fulfilled God's plan, or because more people would be saved than otherwise, or because, well, you see, they're not talking about the same project that you're talking about, and they don't understand good in the same way that you understand good, because their good does definitionally include a supernatural being and a supernatural will that they are trying to attain or be more like. That is the project that they are doing, and you are not doing that project.
Okay, well, just in response, I would draw an analogy to Christians on morality.
I have lost you there. So okay.
So when
can you repeat that again? We lost you there for a little bit.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. So in response, I'm going to draw an analogy about when we talk about Christians and morality. So this is just an atheist take between you and me, just to try and get a point across. When Christians, you'll see some Christians say that they get their morality from God, that their morality is based on the Bible. So you could say, well, clearly they have the project of deriving good from the Bible, and that's all it's about. But we atheists often point out they're mistaken about where they're actually getting their morality from. That may be their answer, but they're mistaken because they're bringing their own morality and sifting through what they think is good and tossing out what is bad in the Bible. And so they may say that I get my project is to get morality from the Bible, and I get my morality from the Bible, but we can actually point to, no, that's actually not what's happening. So in a similar way, as far as the project of morality between the atheist and the Christian, once again, if I go back to my example, when you're debating with some Christians and they'll say, okay, if there's no God, why shouldn't I do this? And why should I do that? It's the same kind of situation where you can see what's underneath is the question of what reasons are there to do this or that. That is the project that they think God fulfills, but that's really beneath it, the same way that their own existing morality is beneath their morality.
Right, and I think the example you gave shows that, in fact, you're working with a different definition of good and a different project altogether. Because when you do, hypothetically take away their God, they do say, well, then I just as well go out rape, plundering, and pillaging. Because for them, there's no difference between that and not raping, plundering, and pillaging. They don't, well, I can just kill anybody I wanted to. No, you can't. But they don't have a grounding of thought for, being good in the way that we think of without this definition of God. So without that, they really don't have the same idea of good that you do. They don't have the same project of human flourishing. They don't even see the point. You just heard Marvin, asking, in this kind of feigned interrogation, well, why is that good? Well, why is that good? Because the Christian actually has no idea outside of their God why it's good. They have no clue. This is what they are trying to tell you. And I think that we atheists need to start listening to Christians when they tell us things like this.
Sorry, can you guys hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you.
I have no idea when you lost me.
Okay, no, it's okay. So we need to start listening to Christians when they tell us that they have a different idea of good than us. They've been telling us that for a long time in very many ways. I will let it drop at that point. Yeah, if you can kind of come back on that and maybe bring in some of Marvin's conversation, and for the rest of the time, I'm going to just let everyone who is still on the program unmute yourselves and engage in some open conversation.
Okay, so I don't think I'll come back on that because I did, and I don't know how much of it was heard or not. So I'll just leave it whatever.
None of it was heard. None of it was heard. So you can come back on it.
Okay, so I gave the morality example for them thinking they find the morality in the Bible. You heard that, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I was saying that it's the same as when you go back to when I said about when you're talking to Christians about morality being based on God, and when they say, well, if God doesn't exist and God isn't based on morality, then they say, why then shouldn't I steal your stuff? Why shouldn't I do this? Why should I do that? And so you can see that underneath what morality is for them is reasons to do X or to not do X. So it's just like their claim that I'm getting morality from the Bible and that's my project. You can actually point out, no, it's not, because you bring your own morality to the Bible. It's the same thing here. So they can say their project is, or you can say their project is, they derive morality from God, and God is the ontological basis. But you can actually, as I say, I think, see that that's not happening. But I can move on to stuff about what Marvin said, if you'd like.
Sure, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to just get through some thoughts as to what Marvin was saying. Okay, so first of all, I got to say I support Marvin's questions and Dale's as well. I think they're both asking the right type of probing questions when they're saying things like, why is X good? I think the question matters because different answers can imply different consequences, including implications for what we ought to do. So, for instance, if the answer for why it's good to save someone from drowning because it's an expression, for instance, an expression of God's nature to do so, when we do that, then it may follow from Revelation that homosexuality ought to be condemned. So you got to see where the implications go here.
Okay, yes. So let me just jump in real quick.
Sure.
It's like pulling hair to get the Christian to admit that God has anything to do with any of this, though. The reason I think Marvin's questioning is a little bit illegitimate, well, why is it good, why is it good, is because these are exactly the questions that you can't get Christians to answer. I have asked for many times, I know why I think it's good, why do you think it's good? When Marvin answered that his moral intuition tells him that it's wrong, that's just an answer to why he thinks it's wrong. It's not an answer to why it's wrong. You understand the difference between those things. And so I know we've got one remaining Christian on the line, but I hope that you represent there. Christians do need to answer honestly why they think things are wrong. I mean, why things are wrong. And they need to talk about their God and their belief in the Bible and divine revelation and things like that to be honest about it. And when they don't talk about those things, they are being dishonest.
Okay. I can agree with some of that, unless somebody else wants to jump in. I can go on.
I thought he was saying for the Christian or something. So I don't need to talk about God at all, right? Because I defined God wrong with Val. So number one, deontologically, it's a violation of an inherently or intrinsic good moral rule. It's good if you don't follow the moral rule, that's bad. Plus the teleological reason, the bad consequences via virtue ethics.
But who gave you the rule? Whose rule?
Yeah.
You have to talk about God, or else you're not being honest about where you're coming from. And I think there's a reason why Christians try to hide the God in conversations like this.
Well, no, it's who's trying to hide it, right? But it's we're taking it one step at a time to get what's complete. We can define good without reference to God.
No, you can't.
Initial.
I've had 1,000 discussions on the board. You cannot. Christians, maybe you have some way of doing it. But if you get Christians to talk about good long enough, it comes back to it's the nature of God. And we just need to start there and be honest with it and have an honest conversation.
No, but that's just like think of the moral argument that I gave, right? We can establish the truth of those moral rules if we're looking at the ontology, and we can both. I can get you to agree that there's a moral rule hypothetically. It says nothing about, well, where is that grounded? Yeah, that's coming. That's part of it. But first, I've got you at the first step that, yeah, there's a moral rule. Slavery is wrong.
Okay, you cannot give a complete definition of good and morality without bringing up God. That is what you can give a first step. That's irrelevant. I'm saying that you need to get to the last step. And the last step, with the whole process, that contains God. It's God written all over it. And that's where the conversation needs to be. And when it's not there, it is dishonest.
Wasn't that,
sakes, that's not
correct
honest.
me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that the admission in the Christian conversation during the discussion over the urethro dilemma that ultimately all of these questions about moral decision making have to come back to God, because the idea is that there is no urethros dilemma, that good and God are identical. And so isn't David right in saying that even in the Christian conversation, there was a nod to that exact point, that there is no moral decision that can be made without being founded in God, who is good?
There is no moral decision that can be made without reference to God.
No good moral decision that can be made that isn't founded in God's nature. Wasn't that actually what you guys described in the Christian Round Table?
Yes. But that's
Okay,
not,
so that's what David is saying.
Well, here's the way I see that, and the reason I sort of take issue. So see it from my perspective, right? David is absolutely correct to say that Christians that just give that, what I call the first step, and then leave it at that, are not giving a complete answer, because yes, at the end of the day, everything, all those moral things that we agree with, well, you want to know what are they grounded in or founded in, as Andrew called it, and that's God. But I sort of see it as David's trying to do an end round and create division before we even get started. He doesn't want even to give the common ground on the first step. He wants to do it all at once and say, yeah, but ultimately you believe in God, so we can't even talk now.
We don't have common ground, and this is the thing that you're trying to suck people in with common ground and then high philosophy, and I'm not having any of it. I'm standing at the gate and I am waving people away from that, because that is fake. The fact of the matter is, when the conversation about moral naturalism comes up, and that's in episode 4, I think it was, the entire Christian rebuttal to that is that morality cannot be completely explained naturalistically. It has to have a God. You have to start with a God. You can't explain it with human evolution. You can't explain it with DNA. You can't explain it with just atoms in motion. It has to be something else. This is where the Christian starts the conversation about moral naturalism. And so to pretend like somehow, no, we've got common ground at the beginning. We do not.
Let me try something a little different here, because I suspect that there's going to be a problem in sort of overlap in the two systems. So I think it's pretty clear. that humanists and Christians share some ethics in common. So Dale, is what you're trying to go after here the common ground between the two systems, or are you actually trying to smuggle God in the second step? So what are you doing here? Are you going after some common ground, or are you trying to smuggle in God?
So it depends on the nature of the conversation, right? So
well, no, hold on. It shouldn't. No, I don't agree. If we're going to have a conversation about ethics and we're going to have that conversation honestly, we shouldn't be trying to smuggle in an agenda.
No, well, it's not smuggling in. So it depends on what my goal for the conversation is, right? So if I'm trying to give a comprehensive view, or if my goal is to prove that God exists, what the heck was that?
I didn't do it.
I have no idea.
Oh, sorry.
It was Val. That's all we need to know. All right.
At the 3-hour mark, the whoopee cushion came out. What a show you've got on for us here, David.
Honestly, I was trying to build the tension, and then we get that. That is not...
Okay, but surely.
But so Andrew,
Just stop the show.
Stop the show. Okay.
Stop.
Look at.
Don't stop the show. We got to keep going.
I'm just gonna put myself on mute.
So Val. Val's. Sorry, I just remembered something from way back that David said that I couldn't stop laughing, and I'm not gonna. Brian's telling me to shut up. Okay, so. So yes, if my goal is to argue for God's existence or to give a comprehensive account of morality, then yeah, you need to bring up both parts. But I mean, look at Val. Val, in the first part of our discussion, obviously God came up there. We did discuss the Euthyphro dilemma. For goodness sakes, how did you guys miss that? I mean, he challenged me on that. Val wasn't suckered in by us having common ground on the first step. He agreed with me to a degree so much, and then he was
David's sort of taking him to task over that, isn't he?
but the point is his concern that people are being smuggled into believing into God. No, it's look, we've got this first premise, let me establish that premise. I tried to do that with David with the slavery is wrong thing. I didn't need to appeal to God. I don't need to start with and I believe in God, and God's the grounding. That's stupid. Why would anyone start there? Start with establishing that what morality is. It's not genes. It's not human well-being and flourishing. It's this logically necessary, or as most Christian they try to say, there's objective moral truths that exist. Great. Now what? Okay. Well, how do you explain those? Christian will say God.
David, with that, let me just get some agreement from David, because it's his show and he could easily just come in and trounce on the whole thing. David, with this groundwork laid, are you happy to let Dale continue?
Oh, I'm happy to let Dale continue, but I don't buy it. So.
Okay. So now we have a real
David,
skeptics and seekers.
Do you honestly believe that my two-step process is like I'm seriously trying to be dishonest? I mean, I'm explicitly stating the premises. People can see premise 2 is arguing for God, and I'm breaking it up, as Randall Rouser said, into analyzable components.
So Dale, I don't want to impugn your motives, because I think that I actually think that you are an honorable human being, from what I can tell. So I want you to separate that from the fact that I think that the Christian project of evangelism is a shitty operation, full of lies and skullduggery, and full of tactics that would make a salesman blush. And so I think that while you are an honorable person, you are still caught up in some of those tactics that I think are unworthy. The fact of the matter is, you are a Christian. Teddy, for instance, God bless her, I think that she's got some of the most toxic religion that's available. But I love the fact that she is honest about it and she runs right at it. She is a divine command theorist. God said it, and that ought to settle it. This is why is homosexuality wrong? It's not wrong because of any kind of logical worlds. It's wrong because God said it was wrong. God damn it. And that's the only thing that matters. And at the end of the day, even with many of your arguments, that's the only thing that matters. And so, yes, you are using tactics to kind of get around to that fact, to ease over to that fact. And I'm saying that that's the fact that you should start with. You should come out with your cross held high and your head held up high, saying, this is God. I am a representative of God, and this is right because God said it, and it's wrong because God said it. And that's what you really think, and that's what you ought to say. I don't care about the tactic that inches us up to, okay, and then this is grounded in God. After about 45 minutes of arguing, start there. Let's have a real conversation.
Val, do you still have that whoopee cushion? I think we need it.
It's gone. Do you want my input?
That took away all my, I'm a little cranky. I've had a long day, but that whoopee cushion has kind of woken me up and made me in a good mood now. But
yeah, by all means, let's turn it over to Val for a couple of minutes.
What Marvin said.
Val, first of all, why don't you wrap up what you've heard over the last 10 minutes here, and then go on to some of the stuff Marvin said.
Okay, but Dale should get to finish what he was saying, because he got to deliver premise one, and Dale just get finished with premise one.
Yeah.
Listen, when premise two is a whoopee cushion, you're all done with the premise.
Well, we'll consider that an atheist tactic. Very effective. Finish your thought, Dale, and then I'll have Val save us from ourselves.
Very quickly. So on the first premise thing, again, I just see it as illogical. We are up front presenting the arguments just like any other argument in a deductive thing that's has multiple steps, and doesn't matter what order you go in. It just makes sense to use common ground. I've seen David do this all the time. He concedes, Jesus exists. I'm conceding that because what? No, you should argue mythicism right from the gate. Be honest. You're dishonest, David. No, he's not. He's just saying, let me give you this, and then even if I grant you this can be.
But you're rehashing history and not your argument, and so let me encourage you to go after the first and second premise that you thought were important.
Okay, so yeah, it's you present your premises up front, then you can take your pick and provide the warrant for each premise. In my cosmological, I'm going to be doing 9 hours or something just proving the first premise, that the universe is a contingent existing thing. That's not being dishonest. Premise 3 is there. It's going to be arguing for God eventually, but I don't have to start with premise 3 and warrant that before I prove the universe exists contingently or something.
Okay. So, Dave, I wasn't trying to take the mic away from you. This is your show. I just thought I'd step in and help.
This stopped being my show at show number 5, which was supposed to be the end. So this is, folks, this is your show. Val, would you mind coming in on some of that?
On some of that? Okay, so we're still on that.
Yeah.
I would just say that from what I'm hearing, I would take a Dale's side on this.
After so many opportunities, you are wrong again. You wanted to talk about some of the things that Marvin said, though. Pick us up on that. I'll deal with you in the comments.
Sure. Yeah, so
because I've got some
the
time
triune-
off, sir, and I am the original atheist keyboard warrior, my friend.
I hear you. I don't think I can keep up now.
David, we're gonna have to get more comments going because I'm pretty sure Tara deleted about 250 of hers, so the number dropped overnight.
Yeah, so like my next comment section, I was going to feature some of her stuff, but oh well.
Anyway,
Guys,
go.
not set targets up like that. It is unfair to expect people not to respond to that kind of setup.
Val, please. I'm muting my mic. Val.
No problem.
Yeah.
So Marvin spoke about things like the triune God as an exemplar of what good is. He also mentioned the problem with evolution as well as far as the naturalist morality. So just really fast, just on the idea that that he floats the triune God as an exemplar of what good is. So I agree that an exemplar could be epistemologically useful, so you can see what examples of, say, good behavior, but that doesn't establish moral ontology. And that said, one major problem with the whole triune God thing is that it seems to be incoherent. I certainly can't understand it, and many theologians ultimately punt to mystery when they're trying to figure it out. So until I'm given an understanding of this exemplar, it can hardly be an exemplar for me. But to get a bit more detail about that, it's like God is either one person or not. He can't be three persons and be one person, nor can we. So if God's an exemplar, if God's exemplar is the triune relationship, then what does it suggest? Does it suggest that we ought to love others? Well, that only works if Jesus and the Holy Ghost are others that God loves. That is, other persons than God, which seems to make for polytheism. But if it's not polytheism and God is one person, then it seems to only amount as an example of self-love, which doesn't seem to go very far in explicating morality and an example of how we ought to treat others. So I just don't see how this exemplar works anyway, not to mention how do we get ought from that is. And also, so we also mentioned that moralism wouldn't track with evolution, which seemed odd to me. I think you put it that way. But we need to act to live, or any creatures would need to act to live, and desires would give reasons to act, and truth-tracking beliefs would be one way of having an advantage in surviving, and the evolution of reason along with this would help us produce acts that fulfill those desires. And those with the desire to survive will be more likely to survive, and those whose beliefs and reason track reality would be more likely to take the right actions to fulfill those desires, and hence survive to pass on their genes. So desirism sort of naturally arises from the existence of such creatures as described above, and like ourselves, and ultimately we'll have more and stronger reasons to promote certain desires over others among a society of social creatures, where consistent reasoning will take into account the existence of other desires. Marvin also mentioned what he saw as a problem for desirism, where he mentioned this neurosis and ignorance problem regarding David and the button, pushing a button in an elevator. And I could respond to that, but I would just respond reading the paragraph that I responded to him on the comment section when you raised that same problem. So you could always go and read it there unless you want me to just say it here again. Otherwise, I can move on to something else. Uh-oh.
No, go ahead and read it.
The response? Okay. So just quickly, so Marvin has said in the comments section, it's incredibly difficult to imagine how David's desire to pick the button-pressing job contributes in any way to what we would call fulfillment or well-being in a way that a moral theory aims. So I responded that the answer to whether David ought to choose the elevator job will depend on his circumstances. We have no reason to prescribe a universal rule: no one ought to be a button pusher for an elevator, and no reason to promote that as a universal desire either. Again, it depends on the individual case. If David had other strong desires that were thwarted by his choosing the button-pushing job, say to study to become a biologist, then we can make the case to David on how pushing the button-pushing job wouldn't be reasonable given his stronger desires and goals are being thwarted by it. Or perhaps it could be that David is a talented mechanic and the only one in town, and many are in dire need of their cars being fixed. which gives others the reason to want to influence David's desire towards fixing cars. This is a prudential ought that in the right situation, it can enter the realm of moral ought. So it depends. So people in general have reasons to promote, and others the desire to help others when possible. And so if the situation is dire enough, the townspeople can appeal to David to promote in him the desire to help others and do work as a mechanic rather than pressing the button. So it's all going to depend on the circumstances, whether this just remains a prudential ought that only takes David's own desires into account. That's generally the difference between a prudential ought and a moral ought, or whether it's going to bleed into becoming a moral ought on desirism. So with that, I can move on to other stuff if you like.
Yes. Can I encourage you to conclude any thoughts that you had with your original conversation with Dale, since we both have you here?
Sure.
And I want to start the project of wrapping up.
Okay. So Dale, you're still there? Did we lose Dale?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. So Dale, yeah, I just wanted to get to what I never got that we set up from the other program where we were talking about the problem of deriving ought from is and what that means ontologically. And then I want to quickly talk about how desirism approaches this question, and I'll just whip through that and so how it moves from ought to is, etc. So I'd say the question is, do is and ought exist in different realms, or are they fully different things? Is there a platonic or supernatural realm that the ought has to exist in? So desirism claims that there's no such division. There is only the is, the world of facts. And moral statements of ought are forms of... Whoops. Am I still here?
You are.
Can you guys still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes,
sorry.
we can hear you.
Okay, so here we go. Let's see. Sorry. There is no such division. There is only the is, and moral statements of ought are forms of fact or is statements. We never need to posit a magic or other realm, platonic or otherwise, where ought resides. So I'm still sort of cribbing from Alonzo Fife here, but so value statements have to do with reasons for action. Reasons for action arise from desires. We are seeking to make or keep true the propositions of our desires. So that desires exist is an objective fact. My desires are an objective fact about myself. The statement, I like chocolate mint ice cream, is as objectively true as my statement, I am under 6 feet tall. Ought simply describes which actions will fulfill the desires in question. So if you desire X, then you ought to do X. In the case of wanting water to boil, if you desire the water to boil, you ought to place it on the stove flame. Therefore, the nature of ought is that it's just another form of is statement of fact. That is, you ought to do X is a factual claim, which means doing X is such as to fulfill the desires in question. So that's an is statement. It's a fact statement. It's either, so ought is an is statement. It's a fact statement. It resides in the world of what exists. We don't have to posit a separate realm for ought. And that will either be true or false, like any other empirical fact claim about the world. And in the moral subset of ought, to say you ought to desire X is to say desiring X will tend to fulfill desires, which is likewise a form of is statement, and it's in the realm of empirical fact statements. It's going to be either true or false. So note something very important, given my criticisms of Dale in the last show, Dale's propositions, that this is not arbitrary. These are not claims based simply on opinion or whim. They're either true or they're not. They're all fact claims that ought to be accepted as true. It does not result in the type of arguing via definition and arbitrariness that we atheists usually critique in theistic morality. There are reasons to accept the claim for how values arise and its objective existence over theistic moral theories. Also, it tracks well with many of our moral appraisals. So if you take the example of two guys, John and Fred, And two different scenarios. John's walking along the sidewalk and he sees that an old woman has fallen in the middle of traffic and can't get up. So John ends up helping the woman, brings her to safety at some threat to his own well-being. Fred also is passing by, and there's an old woman who fell. Fred also helps the old woman across the street at some threat to his safety, and saves the woman. But the difference in the two scenarios is that John desired to help the old woman, desired to help somebody in need, whereas Fred did not desire to help the old woman. Fred only did it because somebody had him at gunpoint, forcing him to do it. Pretty much everyone, if we asked which of these two people are more worthy of our moral praise, pretty much everyone is going to say John did, the person who desired to do it, not the person who did it just because he didn't desire it and because he was on gunpoint. That's because note how this has to do with good character. It's sort of similar to virtue ethics. We care about their internal state or character and about their desires. That's also why we promote in our children desires to care for the desires of others, which would include, the well-being of others. And we want to encourage in, our children, just as in others in society, good character, good desires, not just rote adherence to rules. And so you can talk about, for instance, slavery. How would this sort of appeal to something like slavery? So you have to ask, is the desire for slavery good or bad desire? Does it tend to thwart desires or fulfill desires? And that is, do we have more and better reasons to promote the desire or to thwart it? So the thing about slavery is it's basically an inherently desire-thwarting desire to enslave other people. That is chattel slavery. Let's talk about the worst examples that everybody agrees is bad. So where you're enslaving people against their will. So you are thwarting many and strong desires of the many people you are enslaving. So it's automatically a desire-thwarting desire to promote in a society. You turn the knob up, you're going to get more desire thwarting. If you turn the desire down, you're going to have less and less desire thwarting. But do you have something to promote in its place? Well, we could promote in its place the desire for the respect for each other's autonomy and for mutually agreed upon, mutually beneficial exchanges. So my services for your goods. You have the desire for X to be done. I can do X and have the desire for money. A mutual agreement where both of us have our desires fulfilled is more desire fulfilling than you enslaving me. And that's generally the case if you expand that universally. So that's how you can talk about what kind of desires we want to have reasons to promote. We have reasons to promote the desire an aversion to slavery and promote desires that take other people's desires into account. Done with that?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're at my yeah. So I'm not at my peak right now. So, but
fair enough. Neither am I.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess desires to fulfill other desires. Okay. Well, what if all your desires are evil? And you kind of address the slavery thing. I mean, slavery in the Roman Empire fulfilled desires, and it was conducive to fulfilling further desires in the Roman Empire. That's why it was used. So it's I'm not sure it's that your nice and neat package.
Okay, I can address that quickly, Dale.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you still seem to be thinking of this more in an act utilitarian way, as if the act which will fulfill the most desires, or the acts that will fulfill the most desires, is good. But that's not how desirism works. It evaluates whether desires themselves have the tendency to fulfill more desires. And so, for instance, let's take an example of the classic example of the 10 sadists surrounding.
We lost you there for a moment.
Whoops, sorry.
So, yes, go back to 10 sadists surrounding.
Okay. Okay, nice. So we got 10.
It sounded like the beginning of a joke. 10 sadists walk into a bar.
Walk into a bar with could call them axe murders or something. But so you've got 10 sadists surrounding a woman, and they all have the desire to torture the woman. The woman has the desire for her own well-being, like most normal women. And so if you were on an axe utilitarian version, you would say, well, the sadist should fulfill their desires because it's more desires to torture the woman than there is in the case of the one woman with the desire not to be tortured. But again, that's evaluating which act would fulfill the most desires. If we evaluate which desire tends to be fulfill the most desires, well, right now you've got 10 desires that would be fulfilled and one desire which would clearly be thwarted. But if you turn down the desire to torture to 0 among the sadists, then none of them would have the desire to torture the woman, and the woman's desires would not end up being thwarted. Therefore, that's the more desire-fulfilling desire to encourage.
Okay, but just real quick, the masochist says to the sadist, beat me, and the sadist says, no.
Well, yeah, if you got this.
See, this is hilarious. Just think about it for a little while, folks. Okay, it's late, but that's.
Oh, I got you. I
really,
get it.
really.
Sorry, I worked that. I get it.
Oh God. Okay. Anyway,
But
really
did
funny.
you see
People
what I
just
mean by that,
rewind it.
Bill?
Hear it.
Where's that whoopee cushion when we need it?
I'm going to try it again. You see, the masochist says to the sadist, beat me. And the sadist says, no. You see, now the masochist is being tortured by not being beaten. And so the sadist tortures her by saying, no. I'm just going to go back. I'm going to go back to my whole never mind.
Dave, when you have to explain the joke, man.
Look, I see that I've got the wrong crowd here. It's okay. Never mind.
I was going to say, so Dale, that answer goes back to. That answer goes back to your question about the Romans and however they tormented many people. It's the same thing if you sort of posit them as the sadists, as it were. If you turn down the desire for their torturing or tormenting other people in Romans times, it's the same as turning down the desire to rape or turning down the desire to torture people. You get less desire thwarting, and you can put in more desire-fulfilling desires that we would have reasons to promote in society in their place.
So what's your principle of trying to maximize the amount of fulfillable desires as well? Like it's not just you're trying, whatever, say I've got 5 desires, we're trying to make sure I've got 5 desires, you're trying to maximize the amount of fulfilled desires people have so that instead of 5, they should have 10 or something like that. And is that, again, sorry?
Not quite. This is a bit of a tricky bit. It's not that you are trying to maximize the amount of fulfilled desires, because that could result into a never-ending need to fulfill desires, such that if we had the power, we just keep creating things that have desires just so they can be fulfilled. It's simply the claim that there are desires that exist, and that those desires give reasons to promote certain desires universally and not others. So it actually tends to be, it's more about fitting together desires, you might say, and finding which desires work as being universalizable and others which don't. It's not that you have to keep fulfilling desires as if you were some desire fulfilling machine.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I'm not going to be be able to give like a good thing at this point. But
Yeah, so I don't have to promote in you. We don't have to promote in each other. I would just be restating what I said, so forget.
So with that,
I will re-listen to this tomorrow, and once I'm rested up, and I'll probably notice some things there. But
sure.
So with that, we're gonna go ahead and move toward a close. And here's the thing, guys. I'm not editing this at all. I'm not touching this. I'm going to trim the beginning and the end, and I'm going to put it on the internet, and this is what it is. I was going to reserve the last word for myself, but I'm actually going to just give the first word of the closing right now, and then I'm going to move to Dale, Val, Andrew, who will then answer the moral question, and then I am going to leave it to Brian to finish this off. And so, in that order, everybody got it. All right, good.
Who has the whoopee cushion duty to finish us?
Okay, I hate you guys so much. You didn't get my joke, and then it. You know what?
Is that what that was?
Our noggins are tired at this point.
Yeah. So here we just put yourselves on mute, and then jump off the nearest bridge. One applied. I'm just gonna. God. All right. I've been thinking about morality for a long time. I was thinking about it before this series of shows began. I've been thinking about it during the series of shows. I think that there are some things that we could have done better. We could have done more of. I think that some things were missed. We tried to get them done in this episode. But I just want to talk about some of the things that are important to me in the discussion of morality. And I can tell you right now, moral ontology and moral theory in general, moral philosophy, does not rate on the scale of importance to me at all. I think it's utterly worthless in the real world where people live. And so what I want to hear more of going forward, and if you want to chat with me at Skeptics and Seekers, .squarespace.com, pop on by. I will be in the comment section. These are the types of things that I would like to talk more about. Applied morality, which I think is the real showstopper. It's how you show the decision-making workflow from your moral theory to your final decision about what the good is for a particular issue. And as far as I'm concerned, if you cannot do that, your moral theory is useless. So I would like to have more conversation about that. I would like to have more conversation about how Christians define God as the good. They say it all the time, very directly, when they think it's making a point, but they don't say it quite as directly when we're having a direct conversation about morality. But it's a definitional move. How you end up defining God as good. You know, we have a word for good, and it's called good. I don't see why we need to define that further as something else. And that definitional move needs to be justified. I think that Christians need to have their feet held to the fire a bit on that. Christians are not talking about the same thing as atheists when they talk about the good. I believe this strongly. I've been a Christian. I have had my mindset in what Christians think about the good, and I think that I am correct on that. And I think that Christians must be compelled to admit up front, whenever you have a conversation with a Christian about the good or morality, you need to question them right away. Are we talking about God here? And get that out early on, because you see, that's a pivotal piece. You don't need to make 45 minutes of an argument with a Christian thinking that you're talking about natural morality when you are not. They are never talking about that. And so let's have a more honest conversation. I want to hear more about moral intuition. My moral intuition tells me that it's never right to label homosexuality as abominable and worthy of death. But in some period of history, the Christian God, or the people who wrote about the Christian God, definitely had a different moral intuition than that. I think that God, or those people who wrote about that God, were wrong, by the way I calculate wrong. And so if we're talking about our moral intuition, my moral intuition does not match the Christian moral intuition, either that, or it does not match the Christian God's moral intuition, or either that, or it does not match the people who wrote about the Christian God moral intuition. And we should not let them get away with using moral intuition as some kind of general guide for understanding good, because we have different moral intuitions than they do when they're talking on forums, or when they're talking on podcasts by themselves, or when they're reading the Bible. And we should not let them get away with that. We should press forward with what they're talking about when it comes to moral intuition. Finally, I want to talk about some of the things, and this does get discussed a lot, but I think that it's important. We need to talk about some of the things that this God does that causes people who don't believe in this God, or who don't worship this God, to say that this God is a monster. And whether you say it's an objective fact or not, it doesn't matter whether it's an objective fact. It's a fact to us, subjectively, that this God is a monster. And so just a couple of things that you never hear Christians talking about. It's the strong delusion, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, right about verse 11, but you can read a little bit before and after. For those who are perishing, God will send them a strong delusion so that they will believe a lie. This God is so vindictive. He makes sure that certain people will never find the right path. He proactively sends them false information. This God is the devil. It's that simple. This is what you find when you read the Bible, when you read the manual, when you read the biography of this God. This is what he does. This is a deal breaker. Kill your kid. Look, I don't want to talk about the Abraham test. I kind of coined that phrase. That's not even the most heinous kill your kid kind of story in Scripture. There is, of course, the Abraham test. You bet. But the worst one. It's Deuteronomy chapter 13, and I would actually recommend that you just start at verse 1 and read through. That's just a terrible chapter. But I'm going to read just a little bit of it. So if your own brother or your son or daughter, these are your kids, okay? Your brother, your sibling, your son or your daughter, or the wife that you love, or your closest friend secretly entice you, saying, "Let us go and worship other gods, gods that neither you nor your ancestors have known, gods of the people around you, whether near or far, from one end of the land to the other. Do not yield to them or listen to them. Show them no pity. Do not spare them or shield them. You must certainly put them to death. Your hand must be the first in putting them to death, and then the hands of the people. Stone them to death, because they tried to turn you away from the Lord your God." Are you kidding me? If your daughter goes off to Berkeley and comes back saying, "Hey, I found this great religion. It's Hindu, and they worship the monkey god. Look, I know you don't believe right now, but would you come to one service with me?" let me explain. You're not even supposed to listen to her. Don't listen any further. Pick up the rock and bash her on the head right then. Don't have any pity, but don't kill her. Don't kill her. You need to save some for the rest of the community. This is the moral intuition of the God that you ground your morality in. How dare you question my morality? How dare you question the ground of my ethics when this is the God you serve? God damn you all, if that's what you believe. I will have none of it. And so I want to hear more conversation about that. The stuff that really matters. Let's see your God. I'll put my ethics up against his any day. And with that, Dale.
And that was an example of moral intuition. Thank you, David. Your moral conscience was speaking quite loudly. So thank you for proving that's moral intuition. All that passion that you just put in, that qualia of those moral facts, of what you falsely think is so wrong and immoral, that's moral intuition. So you've just proven the Christian case there by doing that. Now you've got faulty facts that derivative knowledge that's causing you to come to faulty conclusions. This is meant to be my closing, right? So I'm not supposed to be rebutting you. So so I guess in closing, in this show, due to circumstances, I haven't been at my best, and I do want to apologize to Val because the whole reason I wanted to be on this was to give him a chance to give his theory. I hope that he feels he's had a good chance to explain his views. And early on, I did. I've been great. And early on, I did provide some interesting feedback, but this I want to share some of David's passion, which is hard for me, but this topic is important. Don't pay attention to us joking around and stuff like that. This issue of moral philosophy is everything. It's the be all and end all of everything. It determines our moral actions and our guidelines for what we do. Morals are so important, and how we come to moral knowledge and how we come to making moral decisions is fundamental. It's one of the things that makes us human beings. So, ignore any nonsense with whoopee cushions and stuff like that. This stuff matters. It's really important. So this is the Dale Glover version of a passionate plea to care about this, care about moral ontology, care about moral epistemology, care about applied ethics, care about the stuff that matter to David, but take it seriously from both sides and try your best to come to the truth. We live in a fallen world. You're not going to come to perfect conclusions every time, but be open. Open your heart to God. Don't just close your mind and say, hey, there's this fact in the Bible, I'm just against it because our culture is pro-homosexuality. So if you're anti-homosexuality, I'm just going to rule you out. Put some more effort into it than that. That's all. I'll leave it at that. Whoever's next after me, go ahead.
Me? Well, hello?
No, your turn. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll just say that as far as David's last rant, it's always great. He can always channel the preacher. It's amazing. But I have some sympathy for what he said there too. There's a sense in which the most moral philosophy, or what we do in society at the societal level is more important than the moral philosophy. So there's a sense in which I agree with that. And then there's a sense in which I support Dale. Whether I show up in the comments section to go through that, I don't know. I've got internet fatigue as far as that goes. Really, just the one thing I just really like to end on is just thanks for having me on and everybody talking with me. And I also want to make sure that once again that the theory of desirism, of course, isn't mine. It's the author is Alonzo Fife, and his last name is spelled Fyfe. and to get the most accurate view of that. I mean, some of this was my own bastardization of it, my thoughts, and some of it was sort of clear from what he's written. So if you really want to get that, I mean, he any question you have about it, you'll find he has a defense. So if you just Google desirism and Alonzo Pike. And I'd say that the cool thing about it is that, like, if you take the example of Sam Harris and his theory of the well-being of conscious creatures, which I think is actually quite defensible to quite a degree. But the reason I like desirism is that, Sam Harris will say something like, why you should accept his axiom. He'll say something like, asking why is the worst misery for everyone bad is just hitting a philosophical bedrock with a stupid question. He said something like that. So it's a stupid question, but it's not there. If a moral theory can answer that, that's actually important. And like desirism would answer that by saying that the reason the worst misery for everybody is bad has to do with it would be thwarting everybody's desires, and desires are the source of value. And in identifying desires, that's identifying a deeper level of what's going on than Harris has, and identifying that deeper level, you can get more specific about what's going on and talk about specific problems and that kind of thing. So anyways, that's one of the many reasons I like the theory. So anyways, thanks for having me on.
I guess that's over to me. So I'll start with a very short story about a young lady that I fostered, almost 20 years ago now. We'll call her Lucy because someday she might actually listen to this and not like having her story retold with her real name. Lucy was my youngest daughter's closest friend. And the way I came to foster her is that both of her parents were ex-convicts. Both had been in jail for things like felony possession with intent to distribute. And Lucy spent a lot of time at our place because her dad, who had sole custody of her because when I met her, her mother was still in jail, had given her bedroom to a former cellmate of his that had gotten out of jail. Not only had he given Lucy Lucy's bedroom to this former cellmate, but the house didn't have running water. And so naturally, she hung around at our place. We lived in a nice community, blah, blah, blah. And no reason to go into those details. Her dad called me late one Friday night, said, "Hey, have you seen Lucy?" I said, "Yeah, she's here. She's been here for a week or two. Do you need me to bring her home?" And he said, "No, I think it's best that you keep her." And that is, in fact, the story of how we began to foster Lucy. Here's the point. I didn't need a philosophy textbook. I didn't need Sunday school lessons on ethics. I didn't need to compare her situation to a trinity. It was quite easy for me to compare Lucy's story to my youngest daughter's and see that, in fact, their circumstances were very different. And I will say that if you need a textbook to help you make that decision, I question your humanity as much as you would question mine for not believing in a God. And that will take me right into answering the question about giving money to people that I might pass leaving the subway. After that bleeding heart story, you might think, well, surely he's going to say that he liberally feeds every person he passes. And the answer to that is no. I rarely carry cash. I don't consider it particularly safe for me, given my fiscal circumstances, to do a whole lot of that kind of thing. But even if it was safe for me, even if I felt perfectly safe, I still wouldn't. And here's why. We have programs with economies of scale and professionals that are very good at making decisions for who needs service and who needs it worst. On my best day, I don't think I'm particularly good at that kind of decision. It doesn't mean that I don't ever give someone $1. I'm happy to give people the money that's in my billfold because there's almost never very much of it. On the other hand, because I don't think that my ethical decisions are particularly special, I think it's important to have that kind of community involvement. I do think it's important for us to give locally and to get involved. And I have served in soup kitchens, and I do serve on a suicide crisis hotline. That's the kind of giving that I consider particularly meaningful. And while I probably wouldn't give $1 every day or even particularly regularly, I really don't think that's the kind of giving that we're all particularly interested in. And that will lead me to one last comment. I was asked whether I thought social cohesion was important. I don't know where that question originated. It seemed to come from a deeper conversation over on one of the discussion boards. I'll say this. As far as I can tell, our social cohesion is developed at the individual level. And that is the kind of social cohesion that I think we need to foster. A general trust society where we have backup mechanisms that don't depend on my individual virtue in order to create a fabric of society in which we can all survive and flourish. And I don't think we need textbooks to figure out what flourishing is, though I do think the aforementioned Harvard project does quite a good job of creating objective metrics about what it means for humans to flourish. And we can talk a lot about how we found ethics, but in some ways I don't think it's particularly hard. If you've never rescued a kid out of the park or made peanut butter sandwiches in a soup line or worked a crisis hotline or that don't have to serve in the ways I think are important. But I really don't think that it takes a 7-part series discussing the infinite ins and outs of ethical systems to see who is in need. And if you need that, I think that's a conversation worth having. With that, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Andrew. And I'm happy to take us out. This has been quite a conversation. This one is getting pretty close to 4 hours. And I'm amazed at how far we've come, but also how far we have to still go. First, I just want to thank David Johnson for creating this entire series, 7 shows, upwards of 15 different guests, multiple avenues and topics on morality. And I dare say that we've barely scratched the surface after all this activity. This is such a big topic, but it's also a pretty basic topic. It's a topic that we all need to consider. We all need to reason about. We all need to be rational about. And we need to get in the ring and participate in being moral and talking about morality and getting to the answers. So I am just eternally grateful that we have this forum to have these conversations. And luckily for us, the conversations don't end as soon as we hang up this call. There's a message board that currently has over 1,000 comments on this series of shows. It's at skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. I would love to see the number of comments there double on this particular series of shows, because there's more conversation to be had. And to be frank, we need to have these conversations, whether you're Christian or atheist or somewhere in between. We are the people on the ground that have to learn to live with each other. And whether beliefs in God or in virtues or in metaphysical oughts or practical ises, we all have to figure out how to live on this earth together. And that's why this topic is so important. And that's why we all need to be open and available to have these conversations. And I am happy to be a part of it. I'm going to continue to be a part of it. I've been pretty quiet on the boards up until now because I was saving my powder for this final show. But I'm going to get in there and mix it up. I'm looking forward to seeing Marvin there. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you guys coming onto the boards. And I hope there's people out there that are listening that maybe don't speak up often or have spoken up at all. We want to hear from you too, because everybody has something to bring to the table when we're talking about morality. So again, this has been a Skeptics and Seekers production. This has been a multi-part series on morality. I welcome you all to come continue this conversation with us. And with that, thanks for coming.